Morning. My name is Leah Busser. If we haven't had the chance to meet, we have been blessed to be a part of 828 since launch. God's just brought us on this journey. We moved here about a year and a half ago from Washington, D.C., the suburbs. Dylan and I both grew up there, went to Virginia Tech, got married, came back home, had some kids, had a house, and then, God called us. We knew Vaughn and Karen at Virginia Tech. They were our campus ministers, and they married us. And, we went our separate ways for 10 years, and God called us back together. So it's been really a blessed thing. Surprising. You never know what God's going to do. And we'll talk a little bit about risk and following God today. We are in week 3 of our Hero series, and we're discovering what it takes to become a heroic God follower. And this morning, I have the pleasure of speaking on Father's Day. My dad is in the house, came down from DC. I'm so thankful and nervous and fun. It's awesome to be here. But I wanted to talk a little bit from the heart of a daughter today. So the heart of a daughter, relationship to a father, and then also, since we call ourselves family here, we're all about connection. I'm privileged to be up here and share with you, and I'm speaking to you as if you're my aunts and uncles and my brothers and sisters, and just wanted to share a little bit about what God's been revealing to me about being a heroic God follower. I believe that we can learn, and as we're celebrating Father's Day, we can learn so much about being a heroic God follower through the relationship of father to daughter. And, God's been so faithful and blessed me with pretty much the most awesome dad. I'd say like 99% perfect. He'd probably agree with me. And I know not everyone comes from a history like that. It's just how life lives sometimes. And so let this be a testimony of faithfulness. And even if you didn't have a dad that you had a close relationship with, or that you felt extremely loved and protected by, God's been faithful to put people in our lives, whether it was an uncle or a grandpa or, just someone that's come alongside of us and gave us a push in the right direction, being a heroic God follower. So I trust that God's done that for you. And honestly, at the end of the day, we all share him as our father, and he has always been faithful. So something I was thinking about and that God dropped in my heart while I was driving, and this is what I want to talk about this morning, is that some of our traits, some of what creates us, what is our DNA, comes from biological factors. So I have brown hair. My dad's got brown hair. I've got brown eyes. And that's my mom, which I love you, Mom. I know you're listening to this podcast. And although I'm talking about Dad today, I love you and I think you are amazing. Best mom. But Mom always would tease me about how I have my dad's chin. Your dad's chin juts out. You've got Dad's chin. And we have the Allie forehead, which was my maiden name. And we talk about how Dad's got the forehead, our cousin's got the forehead, Noelle has the forehead. So some of those things kind of just travel through your family. They're biological. You look like your dad. You are your father's child. It's funny because even the relationship between fathers and sons can look so much alike. Like even Christy was confused a week ago from when Ron was walking in from far away thinking it was Jake, because they walk similarly and they've got the same build, and it might be a little older, but they share a lot of the same traits. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. The Bible says in Psalm 139:14, we are fearfully and wonderfully made. Our bodies are made in the likeness of our fathers. And spiritually, we're made in God's image. Genesis 1:27 says we're made in God's image. God put some of his characteristics in us, the capacity to love, the capacity to care and have compassion, so it separates us from animals. That part of our soul is reminiscent of God's heart. But the biggest thing I wanted to talk about today was that our biggest growth and lessons in life can happen and are best shaped by spending time with the Father. So there's some stuff I just get from my dad, from being his daughter, and there's some things that I've learned from him by being with him and spending time with him. I believe that knowing who you are as a heroic Godfather follower can only come from time with the Father. Today we're going to be looking at Daniel as our Bible hero. And jumping back to last week, week 2 of the Hero series, Ron did an expository message on Nehemiah, who was an Israelite in the Old Testament. They were captives in another society. So Daniel finds himself in that same situation. They are captured by the Babylonians, and they captured Daniel and some other young men, and they were going to train them in their wisdom and their ways and just make them people in the king's palace that were wise. And so I just think it's awesome that we're talking about captives. This is the same kind of thread, and just how God uses them. All right. So as we talk about knowing who you are as a heroic God follower, I believe that the most key point is that you get strong by spending time with the Father. So as we are spending time with the Father, he hones our superhero powers of having a propensity for safety and risk. He keeps us in close proximity to him. Proximity to the Father is a superpower. And he prepares us with tools. So as we spend time with the Father, we expand our propensity for risk, and we are the safest that we can be. So when I was growing up, my dad was a police officer in Washington, D.C. for 25 years. He served, got a Medal of Valor for running into a burning building and carrying people out. All of this stuff and helped people that were hurt, lived through the cocaine and the crack wars when DC had the highest homicide rate. All these things that he was doing during night shifts while we were sleeping. I do want to take just a moment and recognize local heroes because, they keep us safe. They help create the world that we live in, and just want to say thank you. Thank you for everyone who puts their life out there and who serves, and even not just police officers and firefighters, but teachers and people who are just local everyday heroes. We were really blessed because our hero always came home. And I know that's not the truth for everyone. Not all of them come home. But even when he was away, we felt safe because of who our Father was. So we lived in Washington, D.C. And in those days when you lived in D.C., if you lived in, if you lived in the city, you got to take home your cop car, your police car. So that was his car. Got to ride it home. And we actually lived in the district that my dad worked in. We were right bordering it. And we had this row house. We had metal bars in the windows. We had a metal gate that we would open our door and there'd be a metal gate. We chained up our toys. it would be at the end of the night, we'd come in from the yard. Did you chain up your toys? Yes, Dad. With a huge chain link and a padlock and a key. That was just the life we lived. We had an alarm system, and anytime it would get tripped, which happened pretty often, it was just like meh, meh, loud. Like we were like, okay, is someone at the door, or something happening. And so I'm sure Mom had many sleepless nights. We were sleeping in peace because we knew that Dad's beat was near us. He was near us. If something happened, he would come right around. And that proximity to the Father just gave us this sense of safety. I believe it's the same with the Heavenly Father. There's stuff looming around. There are things. The world is not the safest place. But just knowing that God's near us and that He won't leave us can give us this inner peace and inner safety. I think that, so that's, God speaking to us about safety. But then I also think that God calls us to be risky. Loving people is risky. Taking risks for God is how you become a heroic God follower. I believe that God can call us to do things that seem risky to others, and that most people would say, I don't know about that. So two summers ago, right about this time, it was June, so some pictures are popping up on Facebook about when I went to Zambia. So that was the first of God connecting Ron and I back up, and the Bernards and I. We're going to Africa. I kind of was sitting there unloading the dishwasher one day, like, hey, Dylan, what if I went to Zambia? He's like, sure, it's 3 weeks. I had a little 1-year-old and two other, a 3 and a 5-year-old. And, God paved a way for that. But my dad was not so happy about that. He's like, you're going to be on the other side of the world. Do not make me come get you. This is threats. I'm not getting on a plane. But he would, in a heart's beat, get on a plane, come find me if I needed anything, if I was in danger. But as I was preparing to go, I just wasn't sure. And our pastor in our church in Virginia said the safest place to be is where God wants you. And I so believe that's true. I believe that He calls us to risky things, physically risky, emotionally risky. Things that just are out of our comfort zone. But that's the safest place to be, is when God calls you somewhere. And yeah, we went on a pontoon across the Zambezi River. That was interesting to say the least. We drove our pickup trucks onto there, and it's a pontoon with 2 little ramps. And they didn't even pull the ramps up to go across. They just dragged the front of the ramp in the water, and the tire of the pickup truck is like touching the water. So we're on this pontoon. There's 2 water pumps, generated like gas-powered water pumps, pumping water out the sides. The guys who work on the pontoon are wearing life vests. We're not wearing life vests. So Jacob asked them, so what's up with the pumps? And the guy's like, if the pumps break, we go down. They're just continuously pumping water out of the pontoon. So, you're kind of holding your breath. You can see the other side of the shore, but if those pumps go out, there's hippos in the water. Who knows what else it is. And then I didn't know this, but Ron informed me that just right down the river was a waterfall. So, real life danger, and it seems risky. People are going to look at that and say, why would you even do that? But that's where God called me. I'm safe there. I could have been at home having play dates and, eating apple squeezies with my kid. But the safest place for my heart, and probably physically, was to be where God wanted me. I'm not saying that God's going to protect you always just because you obey. Because if you look at the life of Jim Elliot, he was a missionary and he got killed by the village of people that he was trying to minister to. But then God grew so much out of that, 828 redemption story. But the safest place for your heart is just to be exactly where God called you to be, even if it's risky. Heroes value the safety of others and godly obedience more than their own personal comfort. Believe that God's calling out our propensity for risk because heroes value keeping others safe, teaching others about Jesus, and obeying what God says more than their own personal comfort. I think, 828 is a place you will find some radical loving, some radical risky things that are personal. In the past year and a half, I've had the chance to just love in a bigger way than I had before in the past 30 years. I mean, some examples that I've been stretched at. That's risky. I could have definitely stayed in Virginia and had my townhouse, had my little school where the kids were, my parents 10 minutes away. But here I am going to custody court with a single mom. Never been to court, but just that, taking that step, being there, being a support, praying through that, risky. Caring for someone who walks through an illness, whether it's, hey, pray for me, I'm having a procedure done next week, or this longer term thing, it's risky to get in someone's life. Look at Jesus. He's the ultimate example of taking a risk and come down from heaven to love and to share the good news and risking the fact that your love might not be reciprocated. But God's calling that out of us. What risky thing is God calling you to? Has he been placing something on your heart? Hey, that person needs some love. Hey, why don't you start with that idea that I've birthed in you, that passion, that talent that I've put in you. Work on that. We'll talk about that next. Honing our tools and our superhero powers. If we look at Daniel in chapter 6, let's see here. Like I said, Daniel was an exile. And let's see, in chapter 6, verse 1, it pleased King Darius to set up over the kingdom 120 satraps who would be in charge throughout the kingdom, and Daniel was one of them. So he was distinguished and important. And then all the men they are jealous, basically. They wanted to find an occasion to bring accusation against Daniel because he was getting promoted and getting more and more influence. So they came together and they went and they proposed a law to King Darius that said for 30 days, you should place yourself as the intermediary between you and all the gods. Everyone should pray to you. And if they don't, throw them in the lion's den. It was basically feeding into the king's pride. And so he agreed and he put his seal on it, and it was the kind of law that you couldn't undo for like the life of the king. And so he signed it in, got the decree, and Daniel knew, he heard. But in his heart, there are just some things that aren't illegal. Says in verse, let's see. It says in verse 10, now when Daniel knew the writing was signed, he went into his house, his windows being open towards Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as he had done previously. Daniel is faithful to spending time with his father. And I believe that's Daniel's superpower, is prayer. but he knew that he was safe doing God's will. Safer than even just protecting himself. He wasn't about to give up his spiritual and emotional health based on that. Verse 21, we see that they throw him in the lions and they put the top on. The king's distressed because he actually likes Daniel. And he prays and fasts that whole night, the king, hoping that your God will save you. So the next morning, the king comes, verse 20, did your God deliver you from the lions? And Daniel says, my God sent his angel to shut the lions' mouths so that they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent and blameless before him. And also before you, O king, I have done no harm or wrong. I mean, God has shut mouths of lions for Daniel, kept him safe, kept me safe from hippos, kept Daniel safe from lions. I mean, wow. Our propensity for risk is heightened by spending time with the Father. Now, it was take your daughter to work day.